knowledge is not in and of itself what we're aiming for when we're looking for a meaningful life. So knowledge is good, but it's more wisdom. It's more the right application of knowledge that we want.
Applicable knowledge, sort of. Is that so? That's like it could be a definition of wisdom, maybe.
Maybe the proper application of knowledge, right? So where is it being pertinently applied? And if you think about the sorts of things that we call wisdom, I think one of the things that we could say qualifies something to be wise is that it's survived time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that something survives time is that means that it has, like when somebody says something has stood the test of time, right? That by definition means that it applies in a lot of different contexts. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just very specific to a certain discipline in a certain context, in a certain time frame, certain culture, whatever.
And it stood up to different types of intellects and different types of people over the ages, and has stood strong. Still there. And that,
yeah. And another thing I think of with that is like, so you could be a scholar in a discipline, right? And a lot of times what it takes to be a scholar in a discipline is a focus. It's so much of a focus that you may actually be somewhat myopic, right? So
I don't know myopic.
Short-sighted, nearsighted. So you might be the degree of focus that it takes to get that high level of scholarly acumen may, well, a lot of times by necessity, you have to ignore a lot of other things, okay? And so that may not be, it's not that we don't need that in certain disciplines and that we don't need that in society, but I don't think that when we're seeking the meaningful life or the well-lived life, I don't think that super precise scholarly pursuit is the main thing that we're after. What we're looking for is more the sagely type of wisdom that we can see if we can find that out there. All right.
I wonder what that is, because that is so true. It's that we're somehow inherently not at some point just looking for book knowledge. That there's something, it's like it goes back to I'm just thinking of it in different ways. The applicable part of it is such a big component, and that's also, since it isn't a factual sort of piece, might be a trickier piece too, to add the wisdom to the knowledge.
Yeah. When you said tricky, here's a saying that I like from Nassim Taleb. So he has a saying, don't nitpick a heuristic. So a lot of things, so think about the sort of thing that your grandpa might say to you while you were doing a chore together, right? That would come off as a wise saying. That might be a heuristic. Okay, so
save your pennies and your dollars will wash themselves.
Yeah, so something like that, right? So
watch your pennies and your dollars will wash themselves. Anyway, go ahead.
So a heuristic is a kind of a rule of thumb for thinking. Like it's a quick rule for thinking. And the point that Taleb is making about not nitpicking a heuristic is that he says a lot of times when he puts out heuristics to people, there's this tendency in a certain sort of person to try to find the exception in the heuristic.
Yeah.
You know, like, well, but there's this, but there's that, but
There's always a caveat. That's
you
the
can always
thing.
find a
Sure.
caveat in Grandpa's
Yeah.
wisdom, right? And
That's not the point of it, though, because
that's
it's
not
going to
the
be
point of Grandpa's wisdom.
applicable to different
That's
people
right.
at different times, and that's why it has to be, to a degree, an open interpretation, because
honestly,
for it to stand
whenever
the
you're
test of
nitpicking,
time.
what you're doing is showing more about yourself.
that you
Then
might
the
not
heuristic.
understand the bigger picture
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
You're
So shut your mouth when Grandpa's talking.
you're actually probably showing that instead of taking that wisdom, trying to look for the places, how many places you could plug it in and make it work, or trying to look and see, like, man, that really applies here, 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 and here, and here. Instead, you're trying to find some little thing to nitpick, all right?
Right.
And that's not what it was made for.
It's almost like you're just trying to prove your worth somehow by edging in your little piece of, well,
Yeah,
I know a
this.
little bit better.
Right. It's a juvenile response. So I like that saying by Taleb. And another thing I've thought of with the sage that's kind of a trick is this. One thing that's kind of tricky about the sage idea is that anyone who we could say qualifies as a sage is probably not going to call themselves that, right? And so, like, you're probably not going to be able.
We got a guru over here.
Yeah, exactly. You're probably not going to be able to call any guests on the podcast and say, "Would you say you're a sage?"
When did you become a sage?
Yeah, when did you get your sage
How long does
degree?
that take? I'm working on my sageism.
Yeah, so we're probably going to be doing a lot more of
Sage
looking
degree.
at people from history and agreeing amongst ourselves that we think
Yeah,
this
appears to be a sage.
This is probably wise.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is probably wise. Would you agree? I see a lot of wisdom in those sorts of conversations.